Hi, and welcome to a new video of this MOOC. In this video, we are going to continue implementing our chronometer application. If you remember, in the previous video, we created our application and a new component in order to manage the logic and the template of the chronometer. We modified the default template that Angular creates in order to include, instead of this default template, the template of the component we just created. In this video, we are going to actually implement the logic of the chronometer, including the template and the class that would control the chronometer. And in the next video, we will add several CSS classes in order to manage the style of the chronometer. Here we have a method, the tick method, that is the one that we will periodically call when the chronometer is started. As you can see, using this method, we just increase the property that we will include in the chronometer logic that counts the millis in 1 unit, and then we check if we have also to modify the count of the seconds and the minute. Finally, we set the new values for these three properties in the local ones. Okay, so let's continue implementing this solution. Right now, if you remember, we have this application in which Angular is just showing the default message for the chronometer component. So the first thing I'm going to do is to modify this file, the template, chronometer.component.html, in order to include the needed elements we need in our chronometer. The label indicating the status of the chronometer, the display with the minutes, seconds and millis, and finally the buttons that control the components. So let's go. I'm going to include here one div per one of these lines. The first one indicates the status of the chronometer, and here, using Angular interpolation, I'm going to check a variable, that a property of the component that will be called running, and depending on the value of this parameter, if the value is true, this will be a boolean. If the value is true, the status will be running, and if the value is false, the status will be stopped. Then I'm going to include a second div, including the count for the chronometer, and each parameter I'm going to include in an span. Okay, so I'm including here an span for the minutes using again Angular interpolation. Minutes. Then I'm going to include a second span for the seconds using again interpolation. As you can see, I will create later these properties in the logic of the component, and finally another span for the millis. Finally, I will add a new div with the buttons that will control the chronometer. Okay, the first one is the start button, and I'm going to use here Angular event binding in order to get the click event, in order to capture the click event in this button, and to call a handle start click method that I will also define in my controller, in my component logic. Here I'm copying the button in order to put here the stop button, and finally the restart button. Okay, sorry, reset is the name of the reset button. Okay, so with this I have already the template that I will use for this for this component. I have just included these divs without classes or identifiers. In the next video, as I said before, I will include here the corresponding classes in order to style the chronometer. What I have to do now is to create, of course, these properties in the logic of the component that is included here in chronometer.component.ts. So the first thing I have to do is to define here the properties. Minutes, that is a number. I have then seconds, that is a number. And finally, millis, that is also a number. Finally, I have the running property. In this case, this is a boolean. And then in the constructor, I have to assign the init values. So this dot minutes is 0 at the beginning, this dot seconds it's 0 at the beginning, and this dot millis is again 0. Finally, this dot running is of course false, because at the beginning the chronometer is stopped. Okay, so with these properties created and included in the template, here as you can see, I have the label for the status with the init value, the label, the display of the chronometer, and then the buttons. The next thing I'm going to do is to implement the logic of the buttons that I have here. So when the user click on these buttons, this method, handle start click, in case of the start button, will be called. So I'm going to define here a function that will be called when the user clicks in this button. The same for the stop here, the second one, and the reset buttons. Okay, so when I click on this start button, what I have to do is to periodically start calling the method that I defined here, and I showed you before, the tick method. So I'm going to copy this method here in my component. And then when the user clicks on start, but only if the chronometer is not already running, so the first thing I have to check is if the chronometer is already running or not, I will periodically call this tick method. In order to do that, I'm going to use the JavaScript setInterval function, and the result of this function, I'm going to assign it to a local property in order to be able to use it later for stopping or for clearing the interval. So I will create also here a local property interval, and here this dot interval is assigned to a new set interval in JavaScript that, using the arrow function notation, will periodically call this dot tick method and will be called every 100 milliseconds. After creating this interval, the next thing I have to do is, of course, modifying the running local property in order to put it to true. So that's all. Let's check if this button is working. I'm going again to the application. Angular has automatically rebuilt and relaunched this application, and when I click on start, as you can see, the status property has changed to running and the chronometer has started. For finishing the logic, the functionality of the chronometer, I'm going to implement the stop and the reset functionality. So let's go. When the user clicks on stop, the first thing I have to do is, only if the chronometer is running, if this dot running is true, I will have to, first time, to clear the interval, this dot interval, clear interval, this dot interval, and then to assign this dot running again to false. And finally, when the user clicks on reset, what I have to do is, of course, first of all, calling stop in order to stop the component, to stop the chronometer, and then I have to reset the value of these properties to the init value of them. Okay, so that's all. Let's check again if this is working. When I click on Start, the status changes to running and the chronometer starts. When I click on Stop, again the status is stopped and the chronometer is stopped. And when I click on Reset, the value of the display is reset. Okay, so with this we have the logic of our chronometer already implemented. See you in the next video. Bye.